All right, chapter 22. Capricorn Anderson. The back doors of the ambulance swung open, and there she was. She sat in a wheelchair that was anchored to the floor. She looked paler and thinner, but never better, not to me. I hugged her. Rain, I missed you so much. Okay, so Rain was in the ambulance. She hugged me back, then pulled away and held me at arm's length. I see that. Have you been in a fight? I tried to stop one, I admitted. I guess I've got a lot to learn about peacemaking. She nodded proudly. Good for you. We always try to save the world, but sometimes the world doesn't want to be saved. She looked at me critically. You're gonna have 2 black eyes, you know. I grinned at her. I'll take 4 black eyes if you tell me we're going back to Garland. We're going home, Cap. I think the rehab center was glad to get rid of me. Some of my opinions didn't sit well with my few fellow patients. Like it's a crime to speak your mind. She beamed. I insisted we come straight here to pick you up. I didn't want you to have to spend an extra minute in this awful place. It's not so bad, I told her. Different, crazy, but there are good things about it too. You're a kind soul, she praised me. But it's all over now. We just have to stop at Floramundi's and pick up your things. When the EMS tech slammed the door and turned to Rain. The EMS tech slammed the door and turned to Rain. We've got to run the siren for a few seconds or we're not allowed to pass the school buses. Nothing to worry about. The vehicle whooped and wailed off school property, then returned to making its silent way through traffic to the Donnellys. I ran into the house calling, Mrs. Donnelly, Mrs. Donnelly. I was anxious to share my good news with the lady who had been so nice to me. Sophie looked up from the depths of a Department of Motor Vehicles pamphlet entitled, Welcome New Driver. She's at work, just like every other day. What's so important? I'm leaving, I told her. Don't let the door slap you in the butt on the way out, she said, stifling a yawn. When will you be back? Never, I replied. Rain picked me up straight from the hospital. We're going home. She put down the manual. No fooling. She peered out into the kitchen window at the ambulance parked in the driveway. Sweet ride. Your grandmother's in there? I nodded. She can't come in. She's still not getting around so well. Do you want to go out and meet her? That's okay, she said quickly. My mother's been telling me Rain stories for years. I feel like I already know her. She took in my swollen face and blood-spattered tie-dye. Whoa, you sure the ambulance isn't for you? I was embarrassed. My nose started bleeding at school. I'm fine. You look like you killed and ate a wild boar, she commented mildly. Come on, I'll help you get your stuff together. It took barely a few minutes to fill my duffel bag and erase the fact that I had ever lived in this house. I'm not sure what made me ask if I could have the Clavridge yearbooks. All that was behind me, but studying them had become almost like a hobby. Knock yourself out, Sophie insisted. You're doing us a favor by making stuff disappear. I wrote a note to Mrs. Donnelly, thanking her for letting me stay there. I could have ended up in some kind of group home for all those weeks. I made sure to tell her that Rain was grateful too, since they had known each other. I guess this is it then, said Sophie. I paused at the TV, the only one I might ever get to watch trigonometry in tears on. I can't believe I'm never going to find out how Rashawn does in college. Oh, he never makes it to college, she informed me. He gets run over by a cement truck on the way to freshman orientation. I was shattered. No! She laughed. I'm just pulling your chain. I'm sure he lives on to be a total basket case just like everybody else on TNT. He doesn't exist, remember? I'd say get a clue, but where you're going, you're probably better off without one. We exchanged a very awkward goodbye. I wished her luck with the driving test, and she told me to have a nice life. It gave me a special glow to note that she was wearing the bracelet that she thought was a gift from her father. It was real. It was fun. But it wasn't real fun, she called ahead as I headed down the front walk. It seemed fitting that the last thing she said to me was something I didn't understand. So she said, it was real, it was fun, but it wasn't real fun. And he's like, what do you even mean? I got back into the ambulance and we drove off. I knew I'd never forget Sophie Donnelly. Next stop, Garland, Rain told me. I couldn't keep myself from grinning, which made my nose hurt. It was about an hour's drive. It would have taken even longer, but the driver used his siren to open up some snarled traffic. I could tell the instant we turned onto the dirt road that led to the community. I had memorized every pothole and rut in that driveway, and they were all precious to me. The fact of returning hadn't become real until that moment. The ambulance stopped, and the attendants helped us out, up onto our own porch. The first thing I noticed was the duct tape had come off of my Focallit pendulum. The bowling ball weight had fallen, cracking the floorboards. That was his old science project that was hanging there. I took in the sights and smells of the only home I had ever known until several weeks ago. It looked smaller than I remembered it, and more used. The colors and textures seemed very bland compared to the warm and bright bricks and stuccos of the houses around Sea Average. I felt a pang of guilt for my disloyal thought. This was the greatest, most beloved spot on earth. If it looked a little run down, it was from all the weeks standing empty. Rain could always read my mind. The place is lonely. It missed us. Not half as much as I missed it. Alright, so 22 question says, what unexpected news does Cap receive? And 22. Alright, 23. Mr. Kasigi, his point of view. The conference could not possibly have gone better. I was congratulated by so many people that it was almost embarrassing. Our own district superintendent was confided the principalship of North High would be opening up in a couple years, and the job was mine for the asking. I felt fantastic. Why wouldn't I? I returned to Claveridge flushed with victory. I had no way of knowing the key word in that sentence was going to be flushed. I'd expected a huge pile of mail and a lot of phone messages and emails, but as I sifted through the papers and envelopes on my desk, the familiar logo of the Consolidated Savings Bank kept turning up. I opened the one marked Urgent and unfolded the computer-generated page inside. Dear customer, we are returning this check to you because your account is overdrawn and the transaction cannot be honored. A service fee of $30 has been charged to your account. Stapled to the page was a Claveridge Middle School check with insufficient funds stamped across it in red. It was made out to the American Cancer Society in the amount of $500. My own signature appeared on one of the lines. On the second was written Capricorn Anderson. Remember, he's been gone at some principal conference, so he has no idea what's been happening. My office tilted, and I clung to the arms of my chair for fear of winding up on the carpet. This was one of those checks I had given Anderson. Why was he donating $500 to the American Cancer Society? Not that it wasn't a worthy cause, but this money was supposed to pay for the Halloween dance. Hands shaking, I opened a few more envelopes. They were all the same. The March of Dimes, Habitat for Humanity, Cystic Fibrosis Foundation, all for hundreds. An icy feeling spread northward from the base of my spine. If these checks were bouncing, it meant that the money in the Student Activity Fund was gone. There had been $4,000 in that account. I waded into the mountain of mail with both hands, tossing envelopes in all directions, until I came up with the bank statement. On it, the whole terrible story was laid out for me in detail. There were the checks that I had countersigned, the ones that had bounced, and the ones that hadn't. I saw the deposits for food and music and one or two other expenses that probably had to do with the dance. The rest were all made out to charities. One, to the March of Caring, was for $1,000. What was going on here? I buzzed my secretary. Get Capricorn Anderson down to my office immediately. Capricorn Anderson is no longer a registered student here. I nearly inhaled my tie, like, since when? He left school last Wednesday, came the reply. His grandmother was released at the hospital. Get her on the phone. There was a brief pause, then, it says here they don't have a phone. I did the only thing I could think of. I called Flora Donnelly. I left messages at her home, office, and cell number. I must have sounded pretty desperate because she turned up within the hour. By that time, I had already spoken to my bank manager and a very unfriendly assistant to the DJ, who accused me of hanging rubber paper off my man, yo. Whatever that meant. I turned the beseeching eyes to the social worker. This is your case, Flora. I know you have a special connection to the kid. Can you shine any light on this for me? She examined the evidence, the bank statements, and the bounced checks. Her face was a sickly shade of gray. She looked like I felt. Then she said something I didn't expect. Frank, this is all your fault. My fault? What possessed you to give him signed checks? I was going out of town, I defended myself. I didn't want him to be caught short. Besides, we always give the kids some responsibility with the student activity fund. They're teenagers. They're supposed to be able to handle it. I warned you that Cap Anderson is a boy who may as well have raised on another planet. Okay, I admitted. I didn't notice he wasn't exactly streetwise, but that didn't stop him from committing fraud. He is no more capable of fraud than flying, she said flatly. It's right there in black and white, I insisted. He has found a way to take the school's money and make it look like he donated it to charity. I've got no choice but to call the police. She was suddenly patient. When you gave him those checks, did you explain to him what a check is and how it works? Of course. I'm not a fool. No, she said. I mean exactly how it works. That the amount of the check is deducted from the balance in the account and that the money can run out. Everybody knows you can't spend more than you have. Frank, I never told you this. I lived on Garland Farm till I was 12. When my family moved, I had never handled money. Not even a penny. Money was the key to everything that was wrong with the world, and the leaders of the community kept any financial dealings completely hidden from us kids. I guarantee you that Cap had no idea that anyone had to pay for the checks he was writing, and the power to write them must have seemed almost magical. Once he realized that he could use the power to help people, there was no limit to how much he might try to give away. I was thunderstruck. Are you telling me that he really did take the entire student activity fund and donate it to charity? She nodded. He's got all the idealism of the 60s with none of the reality checks. He's not a criminal. He's the exact opposite. Totally innocent in every sense of the word. I held my head. It would have been easier if he had robbed the school at gunpoint and taken off for the Mexican border. That I could have explained to the board, and insurance would have covered it. What am I going to do? Call the March of Dimes and demand my money back? You could try, she suggested reasonably. This can't be the first time an unauthorized person misspent money. Yeah, to buy a plasma TV, not to donate it to charity. Do you see his struggle? He's like, you could take back a TV, but like, to go to a charity that needs money and say, hey, I need all that money back when it's there to help people is kind of different. Yes. Her face betrayed a ghost of a smile. Go ahead and close that. Don't worry. At Garland, there's nowhere to plug in a plasma TV. Here's a charge that doesn't look very charitable, I muttered, still studying at the bank statement. It's to a jewelry store on Main Street. She looked over my shoulder. I'm sure there's probably some explanation. Prizes, probably. Best dancer, best rap, most outrageous outfit, that kind of thing. I nodded numbly. That was the moment when I realized there would be no dancing prizes, because there would be no dance. It wouldn't be a popular decision, but I saw now that this was the only way. Sure, I could fight with the bank or plead with the charities, but it would just make me look like a fool. Or I could drive out to this Garland place and demand that the grandmother replace the funds that Cap frittered away. Still, who knew if they had any money at all? They were living an alternative lifestyle 40 years after the rest of the world had given it up. The local papers would have a field day reporting that while I was running a principals conference in Las Vegas, my trusted 8th grade president was emptying my treasury. The job at North High was not going to be offered to a court jester. I had to cancel the dance, recoup what I could, and eat the rest. Flora Donnelly was right. This was my fault, but not for her reasons. I had long suspected how the kids went about picking their 8th grade president, and when I chose to look the other way, I was sort of putting a stamp of approval on it. But I always knew that one day it would blow up in their faces. I just never thought it would blow up in mine.